want to welcome everyone to this edition of the Objector Church Webcast. We do these webcasts periodically, and this one is our first one of 2020. And so I'm really excited to have you all join us here. Just a reminder that if you're not familiar with our community, you can find out more about us online today at www.objector.church or follow us on Facebook, facebook.com/objector.church. My name is James Branum, and I wear two hats, and for today's webcast at least. First of all, I am a minister of the Objector Church, a religious, humanist, peace-focused community. So we'll be talking about some heavy stuff, dealing with issues of morality, ethics, stuff that really touches on what we're about as a community. But today I'm also wearing a second hat. In fact, you can see I'm wearing lawyer clothes today because I am also speaking today as an attorney about the legal issues related to some critical stuff. And for any of you who don't know, I've worked practiced as an attorney since 2006 in the area of military law. I'm a civilian, never been in the military, but I work in military courts-martial, defending service members facing courts-martial, but also a variety of other administrative hearings, often just lobbying directly with a commander, trying to get a better outcome in various ways. So, and through that work as a lawyer, I'm heavily involved with a group called the Military Law Task Force of the National Lawyers Guild. We are an organization of pro-service member, but anti-war lawyers and legal workers, and a few law students who are dedicated to helping people to exercise their rights. So from those two perspectives, I'm coming at this conversation today. And part of the reason for this was the last webcast we did, if I remember right, it was the last one of 2019. I talked a lot about the importance of maintaining the infrastructure for anti-war, pro-service member outreach. That it was important to have that infrastructure ready when the threat of war heats up, when things get more difficult than they are now. There was, I think, for a while, there's been this perception that things are easing up, things are getting better. But in that webcast, I argued that no, we have to be ready. Things change very quickly. But truthfully, I did not imagine them changing as fast as they did over the last month or so, when we had the Trump administration assassinating an Iranian leader in Iraq. We saw the counter response from Iran. We've seen a whole lot of insane bellicose statements by the Trump administration, increasing signs of very serious, credible threats of war in a much bigger way, not the limited kind of war that we have seen most recently, but something much more catastrophic. And so because of that, we've seen a massive urgency of the kind of infrastructure and support to support people who are struggling with issues of conscience and morality as it relates to war. And so today, I wanted to specifically go talk about some of the legal elements of this. And our main tool of conversation for this is going to be an article that I co-wrote with some colleagues at the Military Law Task Force. By the way, I'll mention them. They're Jeff Lake and Kathleen Gilbert with the Military Law Task Force. So I'm going to be talking about this article. The original draft of this was written in the context of possible border deployments a few months back. But since then, everything has changed. And now we have this very pressing, very critical situation in the Middle East. And we also are, through the MLTF, we're hearing this from other groups like the GI Rights Network, the Center for Conscience and War, and of course, Courage to Resist, of more and more concern by service members who are worried about what they may be asked to do. And then among the civilian population, I have good friends that are public school teachers here in Oklahoma, and they tell me the middle school students are terrified of the possibility of war and are asking them, will we be drafted? I know that the Selective Service Systems website, as recently as last week, was bogged down. It was difficult to even access it. I tried for a case I was working on, needed to access the website, couldn't access it. Had to go and hit it in the middle of the night to be able to access the website because so many people were scared of the possibility of the draft and were visiting that website. So these issues are real, they are credible, and that's where we need to delve into what the legal issues. And so, what I'll be doing today is I'll be discussing this article. It's called Facing War in the Middle East, a Test of Conscience for GIs. Critical legal information for U.S. service members concerned about the legality and morality of deployment to and orders about the Middle East and war against Iran. And by the way, that article will be very soon up at nlgmltf.org. In the meantime, though, I have posted a link on Facebook to a temporary location. I put the file as a PDF. You can read it there. But today, what I'm going to be doing is talking through this article in more detail. I'll also be available to answer questions and for us to have some real conversation. I'm really hoping there will be some real conversation on this. So if you have thoughts, questions, please post them in the comments string on Facebook. I'll be checking that periodically as I can. I may miss some though, so if I do miss your question or comment, I'll try to respond afterwards on Facebook. But of course, if you have something you would like to email me, you can also do that as well. My email address is james@objector.church. So, without further ado, let's get into the article itself. And again, if you don't have it in front of you, look on Facebook on the comment thread here, and I have a download link right now where you can download it. So let's go ahead and plunge into this. Where did I have it at? Just one moment here. I thought I had it right in front of me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and read the first paragraph or two of this before we move into the conversation. I think my co-writers really did a good job of summarizing this really well, so I'm going to read this. Heading, Thinking about Unlawful Orders. The Trump administration's threats of war in the Middle East raise serious legal and ethical questions for military service members. The Military Law Task Force, the National Lawyers Guild, shares the concerns of organizations such as Veterans for Peace, Courage to Resist, and others that U.S. service members may be given illegal orders or face real conflicts with their moral, political, or religious beliefs about war in the Middle East. We are troubled by the lack of effective legal alternatives for service members dealing with possible illegal orders, and believe it is essential that members of the military are fully informed about their rights and responsibilities under the law. We were also concerned that service members are given almost no information about options available to them under military regulations to avoid a return early from deployment. In this memorandum, we will discuss briefly some of the legal challenges that a service member might face when deciding whether to disobey a possibly illegal order and other options for those who oppose deployment to the Middle East. Okay, so that's our starting point. So we now need to delve into some complicated territory because we're dealing with gray areas of the law. And what I mean by that is that we have principles of international law, the laws of war, we have U.S. domestic law. Theoretically, international law would trump U.S. domestic law. In fact, that's recognized in the Constitution, where it says that treaties that are lawfully enacted are the supreme law of the land, meaning a treaty would even trump regular old statutes, such as the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. Unfortunately, our courts have not always recognized that, and that's where the tension comes. So to delve into this some more, let's look, and I'm going to delve into the military side of things, the military regulations. And so I'll be reading from UCMJ Article 92. It states that, quote, any person subject to this chapter who, 1, violates or fails to obey any lawful general order or regulation, or 2, having knowledge of any other lawful order issued by a member of the armed forces which it is his duty to obey, fails to obey the order, or 3, is derelict in the performance of his duties, shall be punished as a court-martial may direct. So, key thing here, this article says that service members have the obligation to obey lawful orders or regulations. Unfortunately, the UCMJ does not define what lawful means. Now, if we look at Part 4 of the Rules for Court-Martial, this is a set of documents that function in the way of federal regulations They provide interpretive guidance on how to interpret the UCMJ. In Part 4 of the RCM, which is also the punitive article section, in paragraph 18 Charlie, Part 1 Charlie, we get this definition of what a lawful order would be. Quote, lawfulness, a general order or regulation is lawful. Let me back up. I missed. By the way, I think the link I posted earlier on the Facebook thing should be working now. That's on the MLTF website. Just got a ping from Rena on that. So, but if not, you can read the version I posted on my website temporarily. So anyway, so Part 4, Rules of Court Martial. This little quote says, lawfulness. A general order or regulation is lawful unless it is contrary to the Constitution, the laws of the United States, or lawful superior orders, or for some other reasons is beyond the authority of the officials issuing it. See the discussion of lawfulness in paragraph 16 Charlie 2 Alpha. So, if we jump on down to that 16 Charlie 2 Alpha, we are given some rather troubling guidance. Again, this is where the RCM is telling us to find out what is lawful. Unfortunately, the answer is not good. Quote, A, lawfulness of the order. 1. Inference of lawfulness. An order requiring the performance of a military duty or act may be inferred to be lawful, and it is disobeyed at the peril of the subordinate. This inference does not apply to a patently illegal order, such as one that directs the commission of a crime. 2. Determination of lawfulness. The lawfulness of an order is a question of law to be determined by the military judge. 3. Authority of issuing officer. The commissioned officer issuing the order must have authority to give such an order. Authorization may be based on law, regulation, custom of the service, or applicable order to direct, coordinate, or control the duties, activities, health, welfare, morale, or discipline of the accused. 4. Relationship to military duty. The order must relate to military duty, which includes all activities reasonably necessary to accomplish a military mission or safeguard or promote the morale, discipline, and usefulness of members of a command, and directly connected with the maintenance of good order in the service. The order may not, without such a valid military purpose, interfere with private rights or personal affairs. However, the dictates of a person's conscience, religion, or personal philosophy cannot justify or excuse the disobedience of an otherwise lawful order. Disobedience of an order which has for its sole object the attainment of some private end, or which is given for the sole purpose of increasing the penalty for an offense which is expected the accused may commit, is not punishable under this article. And then 5, relationship to statutory or constitutional rights. The order must not conflict with the statutory or constitutional rights of the person receiving the order. Okay, so let's unpack this some. These RCM provisions really leave things in a very difficult situation for a service member. A service member is faced when given an order which they believe may be immoral or more pertinently illegal. A service member can refuse to obey that order if they believe the order is unlawful. However, doing so is done at their own peril, since the final decision of lawfulness can only be decided by a military judge in a court-martial. Now, it doesn't say in a court-martial in this regulation, I should add, but a military judge does not function as a military judge outside of a court-martial. This is weird. In a civilian world, a court always exists. Judges always are present. The court is always there. In the military world, you're dealing with this weird legal esoteric thing where a court-martial springs into existence when it's convened by a convening authority, and then springs out of existence once the court-martial is done. So the only time that a order will be pronounced to be illegal is when a military judge rules it according to this reg. The only time the military judge even has the power to do so is when a court-martial is underway. What does that mean? The only way that a service member can have this tested is literally to disobey the order and then face a court-martial. And if they're lucky, they'll win. But given the conviction rate of military courts-martial, the odds aren't good. It's really a rotten scenario. So, delving a little bit more, we now get into the question of, well, what about the legality or illegality of military deployments to the Middle East? Well, the obvious answer would be to look at the Constitution. According to the Constitution, only Congress has the power to declare war. Absent such a declaration, an order to deploy to war would seem to be legally questionable. However, the last time the U.S. Congress has declared war was in 1942. The U.S. has been in a lot of wars since then, and various U.S. presidents have used either UN declarations or specific congressional resolutions or authorizations to carry out military actions, not declarations of war. And it's very important to note that Congress has made no specific authorization for military action in the Middle East at this time. There was, of course, the authorization for the use of military force in 2001 following the 9/11 attacks, which was to respond against the perpetrators of the attack in al-Qaeda. But the country of Iran did not perpetrate the 9/11 attacks and is in fact an enemy of al-Qaeda. Therefore, this authorization would not apply. Now, another argument some might make is that while Congress, that from the international law perspective, there's two ways the country can legally engage in war. One is with specific authorization by the United Nations, which has not happened in this case. Or secondly, if a country has been attacked, if it's an act of self-defense. However, in this case, by the way, that right of self-defense is in Article 51 of the UN Charter. But in this case, there has been no attack, and certainly nothing of an imminent nature that would require the U.S. to be able to attack. So under international law, it's very clear that war in the Middle East is illegal. Under U.S. domestic law, I would argue it's also questionable at best, possibly illegal. Unfortunately, the courts have not always seen it this way. The courts have generally given a rubber stamp to whatever the executive branch wants to do when it comes to war since 1942. So, what are service members left with? What are the choices they have? Well, there is no easy or unambiguous answer. Service members who choose to disobey our orders they believe are unlawful may face serious consequences because they are, in the words of the regulation, acting at their own peril. In other words, they're having to decide for themselves, do they believe this war is illegal, and are they willing to take the chance that this case for disobedience of orders is brought to a military court-martial, that it will then, at that level, the judge will agree with them. The good news is that they can convince a military judge of this fact, then they win, they're acquitted. The bad news is that military justice systems are largely a conviction machine. They're designed to elicit convictions, in my humble opinion. By the way, the military judiciary would disagree with me on that point, and that's their right, but you look at the conviction rates, they are extremely, extremely, extremely high. And so it's a terrible scenario. Is it possible, of course, for a military service member to appeal a bad decision from a military judge? Certainly. But in the military, you usually will be sitting in jail while your case is on appeal. Oftentimes, you'll have done your entire sentence before your case is actually heard on appeal, which is a pretty rotten scenario. Okay, I'm going to take a break for just a moment here because I've got some comments, I think. Let's jump over real quick and we'll look at those. Okay, I do have now the proper link Rena just sent me, so I will put that on here. So that's the link to the actual memorandum. Also, if anyone has any questions, comments, concerns, would love to hear from you along the way. We'd really like this to be more of a conversation. So anyway, though, continuing on, but also one quick thing I'll mention, if you watch this later, you like what you hear, please share it. That's how we get these conversations out there, how we can broaden this conversation. This is stuff that needs to be talked about really critically. So please, if you like what you're hearing, please, please, please share it. And of course, comment, that helps us. The Facebook algorithms and all that junk, they boost posts based on how much they get commented on. So please post some comments. Okay, so we talked about the terrible choice. A service member who believes they're given an unlawful order, they could disobey the order. If they are lucky, the command might agree with them. Likely that will happen. More likely they'll be prosecuted, and then if they win, great. If they don't, they face terrible consequences, possible jail time, loss of pay, loss of rank, bad discharge. They could win on appeal, probably won't. It's a terrible set of circumstances. On the other hand, if the service member who knows that the war in their heart and their mind is illegal, if they decide to put their conscience aside and fight anyway, they may be freed from the initial risk of prosecutions for disobeying an order. However, they may very well face future prosecutions for the commissions of violations of federal and/or international law, as well as, of course, the personal guilt of having participated in what they know is an immoral action in support of a racist imperial regime. So, what a rotten set of choices this is. It's just terrible, in my opinion. So, where is that left with? What can be done? Well, I think first of all, those of us who are not in the military, we have an obligation, a responsibility to step up for those who cannot always speak for themselves. Members of the military do have free speech rights, but they are limited in some significant ways. My free speech rights, not limited. Most of you watching are civilians. Your free speech rights are not limited either. We need to speak up. We need to speak up against the illegality of these wars and why they're contrary to the principles that not only our nation was ideally based upon, but our world. The United Nations was created so there would never be a war like World War II ever again. And that vision is still there. Admittedly, you could argue the UN has been a failure in many ways. The world principles of international law have been a failure. But in my opinion, nothing gets better unless we agitate, unless we push back. And so that's, first of all, our political obligation or moral obligation. If you're a civilian, we need to speak up. We also need to speak up on behalf of service members who are facing these choices and to be ready to advocate on their behalf. And we also need to have some sympathy as well. When people are facing these terrible choices, there is not an easy answer, in my opinion. If you're faced with the chance of, what we just discussed, the chance of jail now or jail later, it's not an easy choice. And so I think we need to have compassion towards those who might make a choice differently than we would, knowing that we're not in their shoes. But we also need to be ready to stand up for those who do take the risk, to stand up against illegal and immoral wars. Of course, it's important to talk, as I mentioned, there are other options that I forgot who said this. Maybe it was Dr. King, maybe it was someone else, but I heard this old phrase that whenever you think there's only two choices, that's a failure of imagination. There are often other choices we can exercise. And in the context of military context, there are options to avoid a deployment or return early from a deployment. And I would argue it's always worth exploring these grounds for non-deployment or discharge if possible, to avoid the kind of showdown we talked about. Now, for those who feel morally obliged to take the stand, who feel like they must put their body on the gears of the machinery of state to stop war, I respect them, I salute them, every way possible, I'm in their corner. But most of us aren't in that place. And so I think it's also very reasonable to look at these third options. So what are some of these options? Well, one is service members with medical problems may have issues that may make them non-deployable or entitled to medical discharge retirement. And that also applies to mental health issues. Most members of the military by the time they get to deployment, they've already been beat up pretty bad. And often if you follow the letter of the law, they're already eligible for discharge. And so it's important that folks know those options are available. And even if there's a deployment coming, it doesn't mean you can't exercise those rights. It may mean it's harder to exercise those rights, but it doesn't mean it's impossible. Also, many service members may have serious family hardship or dependency issues that may be exacerbated by their military service or deployment. That's another ground for possibly being excused from a deployment or possibly being discharged. Also, conscientious objection is a ground for discharge or a ground for deployment to non-combatant or reassignment to non-combatant duties. The road to get there is not easy, and if there's a deployment pending in the short term, it may be much more difficult. Often, when a CO claim is pending, it's often difficult. Anyway, in the deployment context, it's hard, but not impossible. For anyone who is struggling with those issues, it's important to reach out and get help right away. The best source of information on that side of things is the Center for Conscience in War. And I believe their website is centeronconscience.org. Contact them right away if you're in this category, or if you know someone that is. If you're even struggling with the issues, you're not sure, talk to them. CCW can help. And certainly for those who are in other situations who may be more politically opposed to war, or politically opposed to a particular war, a group I would suggest you contact in that situation is Courage to Resist at couragetoresist.org. Of course, in any of these scenarios, family hardship, medical issues, mental health issues, conscience, it's always important to reach out and get help. We talked about a few groups already, but I also have to mention the GI Rights Hotline. That's probably the best one-stop shop. It's a good starting place for any issues with military service. Their website is girightshotline.org. And then for those more complicated situations, particularly those needing an attorney, I recommend the MLTF. And their website is nlgmltf.org. Now, beyond these methods of pushing back, of seeking an early discharge through other means, it's also important. Okay, we just lost connection there for a second. I think we're back on. Okay, another thing to remember is for service members that are thinking about refusing to disobey an unlawful order, it is important to know there are other ways of raising the issues before getting to the point of an outright refusal. These may include initiate congressional inquiry. That's where a service member writes or calls their congressional representative and asks for their intervention. It could involve an IG or Inspector General complaint. It also could mean seeking redress through the UCMJ Article 138 through the redress of grievance process. And of course, service members still have some degree of First Amendment rights, which gives them the right to speak to the public and to use petitions and protests to exercise their concerns. There are, of course, some restrictions based on military regulations and case law that go beyond the scope of things in this presentation. But as a general rule, what I can say is that military service members are free to speak their minds as long as they are out of uniform, off base, in the United States, not being disrespectful in a particularly egregious way towards the commander-in-chief or towards their chain of command, and not in a situation that might provoke violence. Outside of those situations, service members can speak their mind, including their objection to war itself. And so because of that, many service members join anti-war organizations such as About Face, also known as Iraq Veterans Against the War, and of course Veterans for Peace. Commands will not like this. They will not like it at all. And oftentimes they will try to put pressure on service members to not engage in these kind of actions. But the good news is military regulations do permit you to engage in a wide range of protest actions. Now, because of this, though, because of that pushback, I do encourage, if you encounter pushback, if you encounter problems, of course, reach out to the MLTF, reach out to the GI Rights Hotline, any of these other groups. These are all groups who are willing to help you and to assert yourself and to be safe in exercising your rights. What I'll conclude with this article, I'll just read you the last little bit of it. I've been kind of summarizing. I'm going to read this last bit because it says, the Military Law Task Force wants service members to be fully informed as they make these choices, and it urges anyone who is deployed or might be facing a future deployment to call us for a referral to a civilian attorney or counselor to discuss your options. Many of our member lawyers will be willing to do an initial pro bono or free consultation, and if additional legal defense assistance is needed, organizations like Courage to Resist, About Face Veterans Against the War, and Veterans for Peace stand ready to help raise needed funds. And then there's a whole, in the article itself, there's a list of these organizations and their websites. So anyway, what I want to kind of bring this back full circle in our conversations here in our context of the Objector Church is that for those of you watching, of course, if there's military service members, I've directed a lot of this towards you directly because I want you to be fully informed. But for most of our viewers, I'm suspecting most of you are civilians, maybe peace activists, maybe actively involved. Many of you may be veterans, but you are civilians. And so I would urge you, this is the time to stand up for service members facing these terrible choices. They should never be put in this place. And we have the power to stop this crap. We have the power to push back through our political process, of course, through lobbying, through all those things, certainly elections, maybe. I'm a little cynical, but all those things are important. But we also just have to keep these issues on the radar screen of the public. So we have to keep pushing. And we especially have to keep reminding the American public that if you're going to support the troops, you have to really support them as people. And to realize that often the mission of the military is completely contrary to what's best for the troops. And so it's really critical we stand with them. There's so many ways to do that. We've talked about some already today. Haven't even touched on some other big issues, the importance of counter-recruitment, helping to keep people from joining the military in the first place, of looking at and also dealing with the bigger, broader international issues of peacemaking, of what it means to work to promote dialogue across the lines that might divide us. These are all really important. But whatever path is right for you, we all have work to do. It's time to get after it. It's time to do it. So I want to thank everyone who's tuned in today. I know this was kind of last minute. It's probably why I didn't get a lot of comments on this live. I'm hoping we'll have more comments as we go along. So if you like what you've heard, please comment, please share it. That helps us get the word out. And of course, read the article if you can and share that. We really need to get the word out. One thing to bear in mind is why the timing is so critical. If you look at past wars, some of the major turning points in past wars were when the president could no longer count on the troops to follow orders. That happened to Nixon in Vietnam. It happened in previous wars as well. And right now, Trump needs to get the message that if he sends our troops into places they have no business being, if they are sent into places where that is illegal and immoral for them to be at, Trump needs to know the American people are not on his side. And when troops refuse to obey unlawful orders, they need to know we're on their side. So, which side are you on? You have a choice. Let's be on the right side. Let's be on the side of the little guy, the man, the woman who's saying, no, I will not fight in an unjust, immoral, illegal war. So we need to be ready to take up their cause. So we'll leave it at that for now. Just a reminder, if you'd like to watch more of our webcasts, you can find them at our website, objector.church. And of course, we always need support to keep doing our work. The Objector Church, we are the fiscal sponsor for Courage to Resist, which is one of the leading organizations working on issues of war resistance, conscientious objection, military whistleblowing. So if you have a chance, please send them a donation. It makes a big difference. And of course, find your way, find your path of how you can resist war. So we'll leave it at that there for today. And thank you so much, and we'll see you again soon. Bye now.
The MLTF, the Military Law Task Force of the National Lawyers Guild, has been active in the struggle for the rights of U.S. military service members from its anti-imperial and anti-war perspective since the Vietnam War era. We are a group of attorneys, legal workers, law students, and barracks lawyers interested in draft, military, and veterans issues. Our website can be found at nlgmltf.org. Again, that is nlgmltf.org.